What's the scariest thing you've woken up to in the middle of the night? In college, I woke up one night to an absolute blood-curdling scream and what sounded like someone ripping a piece of thick fabric outside my window, not right outside it but like 10 to 20 feet away. Two of my 3 roommates at the time also heard it and we all ended up in the kitchen talking about it for a bit before calling 911 to report it and then going back to bed. I couldn't, so I watched Fear and Loathing first and then eventually passed out once the sun came out. Walking to class the next day there was police tape in my neighbor's yard, we were on the corner, and this was the house behind us. Turns out the noise we heard was someone being murdered. And the scariest part? About a year later, we all learned that the killer was a cop. I woke up to my mom panicking and locking my door and asking me to call the cops. It was around 3 a.m. and someone was trying to choke her and possibly do worse. She said that she heard someone open her bedroom door and lay on the corner of the bed. She called my name out multiple names thinking it was me, but then someone tried choking her and cutting her with something. She managed to kick them off and ran downstairs into my room to protect me. Once the police came, they did a search outside our home and found nothing. They asked if anyone else lived with us, and we said the only other person that lived with us was a man who rented the downstairs basement, but he was never a problematic person. This man went to church every Sunday and kept to himself. Honestly, he was barely there half the time because he was always working. They decided to speak with him anyways and they found him in his room masturbating to porn and bleeding heavily because he had accidentally cut himself when my mom kicked him off. Yeah, that was scary. After that event, I had horrible sleep paralysis for several nights. I kept dreaming that a black shadow would crawl into bed right next to me and strangle me. So, I've had a lot of comments say that I'm lying about this event, but I have no reason to lie. This was really traumatizing for both my mom and I. My mom didn't want to press charges because she was fighting for my sister's custody, and didn't want the judge to see my home as an unfit place to be because of the event. My mom was also not legal at the time, so I'm guessing part of her was also scared she could be deported or something. Why did the cops let him go? I couldn't tell you, I'm not a cop. I don't know how those things work. Although they came and helped us, many cops in my town are very rude people. My mom had previously tried calling the cops when her ex, my sister's dad, gave her a black eye and they did nothing about it. My mom has had a rough life and a lot of unjust things have happened to her. It actually makes me want to cry when I read comments saying that I'm lying because my mom almost got raped and possibly killed, and people think I made up a very detailed story for some damn upvotes. Grow up. My mom is amazing, and I'm so thankful that her first thought was to run down to my room and protect me. This is my favorite story to tell. I'm absolutely terrified of a home invasion type of situation. I'll blame it on the copious amounts of true crime podcasts I listen to. So, when I'm home alone I constantly check the locks and sleep with a knife next to my bed. Husband goes out of town for 2 nights, first night all is good. The second night I check the doors, lock my bedroom door, and go to sleep. Well, I woke up at around 3 a.m. to the sound of the door rattling a bit. My first instinct is that it's one of the cats pawing at the door wanting out, but after I've fully woken up I realize it's someone trying to twist the doorknob. I completely freeze, my heart is racing, and I slowly reach for the light switch. I then start to think that maybe I don't want them to know I'm awake by turning the light on so that maybe I can hide or grab my knife. Our indoor doorknobs, if you twist them hard enough, will just pop open. So I finally hear it click and the door just barely opens about 5 inches. I can see the outline of a man standing there just barely lit from behind by moonlight coming in the living room sliding door. So I'm just sitting there in this frozen position with my arm halfway reaching for the light and the other half reaching for the knife for what feels like an eternity. He just stands there, staring in the door, and I'm convinced I'm about to be murdered. And then the door opens a little bit more, and the man's outline starts to become clearer. I manage to just barely whisper my husband's name, and hear back, "Yeah, why is the door locked?" This asshole had decided that the friend he was sharing a hotel with was snoring too loud and drove home 4 hours in the middle of the night. One night when I was sleeping over at my friend's house, his younger sister, who was apparently a sleepwalker, came into his room in the middle of the night dead asleep and sat down cross-legged at the end of his bed, and with a cup that they had next to the sink in the hallway bathroom that she had somehow grabbed on the way in there, started putting it on and taking off the end of one of her bare feet like she was trying on shoes, all while half singing / half humming the Gem and the Holograms theme song. To someone like me who had never witnessed such behavior before, it was a jarring and confusing sight to wake up to. It was more than my 13-year-old brain could process, but my friend just laughed it off and explained that she sometimes would sleepwalk and sing since she was younger, and it was something he had just gotten used to. Despite my friend's attitude about it all, I can say I wasn't overly eager to sleep over there again. A home invasion. As I'm laying sound asleep in my bed, I wake to a bright light source shining on my face. I open my eyes and see 2 sets of legs / feet standing directly next to my bed. My first thought upon waking is that it is the police. I very quickly realize though that these are not cops, but burglars. Amazingly, I don't at all cower, but instead, feel an intense surge of anger. I immediately jump out of bed and begin to scream at the top of my lungs, "Get the fuck out of my apartment!" I continue to scream this like a chant. The burglars immediately do a turnabout and book it out of my apartment with me in the chase. When I chase them out my patio door, I stop, as I'm only wearing underwear. I find that all of my electronic components are unplugged and ready to be stolen. However, everything is in place except for my CDs, which are gone. The police were very good about how they responded. They sent a CSI person to take prints of my apartment, and the detective responsible for my case even phoned me 2 days later to say that no matches to the prints were found. I wasn't surprised. I think they were just a couple of brazen teenagers. I told the cop, "How stupid can you be to shine a flashlight into someone's face and not expect them to wake up?" He told me, "Well, criminals aren't exactly known for having high intelligence, which is one of the reasons they are criminals." Good point. Anyway, only after these 2 idiots were out of my apartment did it occur to me that they could have been armed and could have panicked and shot me. It was only at that point that I felt the anxiety of fear. When I was in middle school, my grandmother stayed the night as my parents were away on vacation. She comes in at 3 a.m. and says, "Stimp, do you have any friends over?" I tell her no, and she walks down the hallway. Confused, I roll back over to go back to bed when I hear something that sounds like breathing from behind my door. "Hello." I called out, only to be greeted by a shadowy figure appearing from behind my door. From the light in the hallway, I could see it was a tall Hispanic man in a leather jacket, who then looked over to me and said, "You all right? You good?" I, completely flabbergasted and downright confused, mutter out a quick, "Yep," and try my hardest not to freak out. Then this guy walks over and sits on my bed, looks at me, and says, "Do you want me to let your dogs out for you?" Now mind you, I was going through a phase where I slept in the nude, so I'm chilling here in the buff with a random man sitting on my bed. I eventually respond with a, "No, they're fine. Do you need help getting out?" To which he nods his head and walks out of my room. I quickly throw on some sweatpants and go down the hallway to the front door, where I see him struggling to open the door handle. "You got to push then pull," I tell him, and he eventually gets it open. He runs out the front down some stairs, as a cop car drives onto our property. At this point, he sees the cop, turns around, and runs right into our basement. We lived in a raised ranch. The cop calls out to me, "Hey, does that guy live here?" I shake my head no, and he gets his canine out of his car and lets him loose into the basement. After 10 minutes of searching, they gave up. He apparently got out through a window, and they never caught him. A bunch of cars was broken into on our street, and a gas station saw him trying to get into the front door. All in all, a pretty fun experience. 9/10 would do it again just for the PTSD it gave me for a few years. Woke up to the sound of my mother screaming. I got up and rushed to see what was happening. And she was holding her head, screaming. She went unconscious. We took her to the hospital. A brain aneurysm ruptured, and she had a stroke from that. She had surgery and they saved her life. But she has a hard time talking now and her understanding is very bad now. Most terrified I've been. After that event, I couldn't sleep much. I was scared of something happening like that again. It's been 2 years since. I'm still struggling with PTSD from it all. But I'm glad my mom is still here. She took care of me all my life, but I take care of her now. Odd how things got reversed. But it's just the way things happen. This went on too long, sorry. Middle of the night and I wake up to the sound of my keyboard being typed on. I was still living with my parents at the time, so in my sleepy fog, I assumed it was my sister using my computer. So, I just closed my eyes to go back to sleep. Then it hit me, the room is totally dark, so the monitor isn't on. That's when I got freaked out. So, I slowly turned my head and saw nobody at the desk, and yet the typing sound continued. I jumped out of bed and hit the light switch, in full freak-out mode. And that's when I realized my pet guinea pig's water bottle was empty, and she was biting the end of the metal tube with the ball bouncing around inside. Shit sounded exactly like typing on a keyboard. Was driving for 13 hours in my Jeep Cherokee. Pulled into a hotel off the road and parked. Jumped in the back seat to sleep. Windows tinted. Hear scratching and metal grinding, poke my head to the front window where the noise was coming from to find a car thief breaking into my Jeep. Full on ski mask and everything. He jumps and startles, says oh shit, and runs away to a van waiting near the entrance and they book it. The stupidest part was that I just went back to sleep because I was so tired. They probably could have come back with a gun or knife. In the morning I checked my lock outside to find they were probably 2 seconds away from clicking it open and getting in, then things would have really got interesting. Waking up mid-joyride, ha 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 ha. The blood-curdling screams of a family friend as he realized he had just killed his girlfriend. I can hear him even now, repeatedly screaming I killed her, I fucking killed her over and over. I remember jolting awake and opening my bedroom door to find him standing there with huge gashes all over his stomach. He's bleeding everywhere, crying, and begging for someone to tell him what to do. My mother stood there trying to calm him down and hold pressure on his wounds and stop his bleeding, but it was really bad. She shoved me back into my room and told me to wait for her, and not knowing what else to do, I did. He cried and screamed in front of my bedroom door for what felt like an hour, but I'm honestly not sure. My mom did eventually come in and explain to me that he had been drunk driving and hit black ice on a turn and flipped his car. They said his girlfriend died instantly, but he wasn't sure that night when he left the scene of the accident and headed to our house. I was told I could never tell anyone what happened that night, and for a long time I didn't, but he did turn himself in and is currently serving life. It is a horrific memory, but I will say that it has always prevented me from driving impaired and that I can appreciate it. Probably the time I was sleeping at my deer/hog camp and I woke up and I was staring at some eyes through the window. There was just enough light for me to see the light reflect off of those eyes. The smell, I knew the smell, and it was blood. The smell was like nothing I smelled before or since. I have smelled burning flesh, rotting bodies, and meth labs, and nothing smelled like this. So of course, I yelled, grabbed my rifle and ran outside. When I got out there, nothing, no tracks, nothing but the dead silence and 4 dead and eaten dogs. We never heard them bark, and some of the dogs were mean as hell. I have a trained dog that is my general purpose dog. I trained him as a guard dog, retriever, and on hogs. This dog never shakes, but he was under my bed terrified to the point of him pissing/shitting himself. My buddies lost 2 dogs each and we still to this day don't know what killed them. We even had a necropsy performed and the vet said whatever it was killed them instantly. The dogs didn't suffer and no evidence was found of any other animal that could possibly do this. I sold the camp the next day. This happened a couple of years ago but comes up frequently in conversations because of how much it freaked me out. Anyways, I woke up and was like completely awake. I just lay there for a moment confused before I hear a faint sound, like the bass of a song being played in a car far away. I look at my phone and it was 3:30 exactly. I mentally shrug it off and attempt to go back to sleep. Suddenly there is a very loud and prominent drumming sound. Boom, boom, boom. A deep and steady drumming and I can't figure out where it's coming from. I am now very confused but entirely unconcerned. I then hear someone walking around my house and decide to grab my tiny little pocket knife and investigate. Walking out into the hall I run right into my mom, who is literally shaking. Apparently, she woke up at exactly 3:32, and was upset. We spent the following order freaking the fuck out as we go from window to window trying to find the drumming noise. The sound finally stops and was like haha okay that was weird but I'm freaked out and asked to sleep in my mom's room. I was a wimpy 12-year-old. We head back to her room and the drumming sound starts again. This time it sounds like it's right outside the window. My mom goes to the window and the drum sound just starts moving around and sounds like it's in the house. It only lasted a moment after that and was silent. We haven't heard it since. I jokingly asked my neighbor about it the next day and she said yeah. I heard it too. I thought you guys were playing drums in your house. Weird that my dogs didn't bark though. Still freaks me out to this day. One other story that comes to mind is just recently, about 2 months ago, my girlfriend and I were woken up by a loud scream across the apartment complex. This young woman, about 20, was screaming for help at the top of her lungs as you could hear loud thuds coming from her apartment. My girlfriend got out the door first, and I quickly followed. We got outside and the thuds and screaming had stopped. We thought she was dead. We called the cops and waited. Luckily, she was alive. She and her boyfriend got back from having drinks late and they got into an argument, and he hit her, followed by tearing the apartment to pieces, which is the thuds we kept hearing. He then left through the back door. I will never forget that scream. I have never heard anything like it. A group of friends and I were hiking and camping in the winter during our winter break. We shared a group tent, there were only 6 of us. On the last night of the trip, we decided to head to bed early to get extra sleep for the long hike home. Around 3 a.m., I hear a pinging noise sort of like what you would hear if you threw a BB pellet at a tin roof. It was quick, just 1 2 3. I thought nothing of it and figured it was just all inside my head until 2 other friends quietly asked if anyone else had heard the pinging noise. We decided to wait for a minute, grab our pistols and flashlights, and slowly venture out of the tent to see what was causing the noise. We found a man, stripped of his clothing, dead in front of our campsite half covered in snow. There were 3 bullet wounds, one to his neck, another to his genitals, and the last to his femur. A friend and I immediately began climbing to find a spot with service. Night hiking in snow is horrible, don't do it, and called 911. Roughly 45 minutes later, an EMT helicopter arrived and picked up the body, while a squad of forest rangers combed the woods immediately surrounding us. The body was never identified and is now buried in an unmarked grave near my hometown, where I was attending school. I'm not well versed on pistols and silencers, but I can only assume the pings we heard were the rounds fired. Woke up to a siren warning of a missile attack, possibly with chemical and/or biological weapons. During the First Gulf War, I lived in Israel, and as soon as the US attacked Iraq, Saddam Hussein sent missiles to Israel in order to escalate the war. We were all prepared for a chemical attack and had gas masks, antidotes, and a sealed room on standby. During the first attack, the sirens started in the middle of the night. We all woke up, panicking we are being gassed, while hearing explosions nearby. We wore our individual gas masks and prayed. In the end, the missiles didn't contain any chemical or biological warheads and the damage was mostly local. However, this was definitely the scariest thing I've woken up to in the middle of the night. After the first attack, we were all less panicked during the following attacks, as it was obvious that Iraq will not use or even have chemical weapons, and we were just happy there was no school. Woke up to insane shrieking and scrapping outside my window. Tried to sleep and for the next 5 minutes I could hear a skulk of foxes and something else fighting and the foxes were clearly winning. But I was hoping it was just overfood and they'd bugger off. Then all of a sudden it really started to cry and the foxes would take turns to run over the wall it managed to hide behind and bite the poor thing. Each time it would cry and cry. I lost it. This was the cry of an animal that knew it was going to be food imminently. So, I put on my clothes and grabbed my umbrella from the door and chased the foxes away out of my garden and down the street. In the morning plenty of dried blood all over, couldn't find the thing, so I guess he ran off to die someplace out of sight. I'm not usually that taken by things, but the cries as it was being killed by a few foxes really got to me. Shortly after September 11th, I was staying at the Lax Hilton, Los Angeles Airport Hilton, woke up in the middle of the night, and decided to go for a walk. I was staying on the upper floor. I walked around the floor and couldn't find the elevator. Turns out the fire doors had shut and the wallpaper on the walls was also on the fire doors. Crappy thinking. I go down the elevator and hear alarms, start to smell smoke. The elevator doors open, the entire lobby is filled with smoke. The hotel is on fire. They never woke any of us staying there. Next day I get interviewed by the cops because apparently while standing on the sidewalk watching them put out the fire, the person of interest who had been removed from the property earlier that day had allegedly set it on fire, and while I'm standing outside she was talking to me. The Montana earthquake last summer. Never having experienced one before and living in Montana, obviously I wasn't suspecting one. I know there's been a few throughout history but nothing substantial. I grew up in the Midwest, so my first thought was a tornado or microburst. It calmed down after a few seconds, and by the time I got up and looked out the window it was dead calm, so I was like, that's strange. The kid was screaming, and the dogs were freaking out, so I go to calm them down, and the first aftershock hits a minute or two later. That's when I realized what was going on. There were aftershocks every few minutes for the next 2 hours that kept everyone up. Woke up at about 4 a.m. to a massive, scary, mentally ill homeless man in my bedroom, about 3 inches from my face. He was so huge that he got in by running through our deadbolt. He was talking to himself and staring at me really closely, holding a screwdriver. I guess between the adrenaline and the sleepiness I didn't realize what was happening and just stared up at him. Thank God he eventually just left. He didn't steal anything except a light bulb, which I later found outside in my bike basket, and the screwdriver. He did go through our kitchen and bathroom cupboards though, take our coats out of the closet and take down any art or photos on the wall that had visible eyes in them, leaving everything else hanging. The creepiest part was that there was evidence of him having been to our apartment before, and possibly again afterward. I picked him out of a lineup, and he was held briefly, but because he didn't attack us, it was a light charge. My dogs rarely get too much outside time sadly, which means they don't do well with other dogs or people. Whenever I get a package at my door, my dogs literally jump at the door and bark like it's the end of the world. Anyway, one night at exactly 2:35 a.m., I hear my dogs start barking like crazy. Not just a mail carrier or a Girl Scout or a Jehovah's Witness, but like their lives depend on it. I try to ignore them and play it off as a deer in my yard or some bad wind. Shortly after the barking stops, I hear one of my dogs crying really loud. At this point, I have no idea what's going on and decide to venture downstairs slowly and dramatically like I'm in a scary movie. When I get downstairs, everything is fine but my dogs seem really happy to see me. I check the security camera and see two men in black clothing walk up to my front porch and look into my windows for a solid 5 minutes. That's when the dogs started barking and they quickly left. I don't know what those guys were there for, but it probably wasn't to talk to me about their Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Husband, dog, and I was all sound asleep at around 2 a.m., when suddenly, boom. A tree fell on the house. It scared hubby and me so badly that neither of us could speak for a few minutes because we each thought we were having a heart attack. The dog was standing up on the end of the bed snorting hard and shaking his head over and over again. I guess he thought he was having a heart attack too. I distinctly remember hearing glass breaking and a tinkling sound. Figured out later it was because the tree also crushed the gas barbecue grill. It broke the glass in the lid and ripped the gas tank off and it went rolling down the hill. My family was staying in a hotel for an extended family, dad's cousin maybe, member's wedding when I was about 5. My older sister and I were in the bed near the door. She was afraid to sleep near the window. I was closest to the door, then my sister and my parents were in the second bed near the window. It's pitch black in the middle of the night and our door opens, waking me up. I looked up and saw the shadowy figure of an older man in a trench coat with a fedora. Just the silhouette. I, of course, lost my shit and started screaming, waking up half the floor. Turns out there was a mix-up at the front desk and they'd given our room key to a great uncle with the same last name and a very similar first name, one letter apart, think Gerard vs. Gerald. My sister and I didn't sleep for weeks. The sound of something banging on the outside wall of my bedroom, and then the window, repeatedly, loudly, solidly over and over, for all the time it took me to wake fully up, pull on some pants, wake my husband, grab a baseball bat and head for the front door to see WTF. As I rounded the corner for the door, I spotted the largest rack of horns I'd ever seen, just passing by another window of my house. I crept up to that window to see him start banging his horns against that wall/window as he ate the roses off my rose bush. It was unseasonably cold for September, and I guess he was willing to risk a closer encounter with people than would be normal for the sake of some tasty roses. He was beautiful and frighteningly huge, and worth the loss of most roses. It was maybe 1 a.m. I had so much adrenaline flowing that sleeping for the rest of the night was out of the question. I was lying in bed one night when I heard my car horn blow. I and my wife woke up and looked out the kitchen door. We were in a rural wooded area. A single pole light lit the area where our 2 cars were. No lights flashing. No sounds. We turned around but didn't even make it back to her before I heard it again. My wife stood at the door and watched as I walked out onto the porch. I thought it was my wife's van, so I walked down through the clearing and got in the van. Looked around. Nothing. I turned the car on and then turned it back off. That's when I heard the horn again. It wasn't the van. It was my truck. My hair stood straight up. I was terrified as I turned to look. There was a person wearing a hoodie in my truck. He honked the horn again without turning his head. The weird thing is I didn't get angry or scared. I didn't feel threatened. He was sort of nodding back and forth. Disoriented. I got out and walked over to the truck. I said, "Hey man, what are you doing?" He slurred his speech a little. I opened the door, and he was covered in blood. He was about 18. We spoke for a second and I finally put together what had happened. He had crashed his truck and hit his head pretty badly about 100 yards down the road. He stumbled back down the road and saw my truck. It was the same make and model as his. He got confused and was trying to start the truck with his keys. He didn't smell like alcohol. He definitely had a mental disorder. I asked for his phone and called his parents. Where is he this time? Dang. That suck. I stayed with him until they showed up. Said hi. Wished them well. Saw his truck on the side of the road in a ditch on my way to work the next day. At 2:30 a.m. on a Monday, I heard the door in my room open up. Lights turn on and I heard a voice say, "Wake up." They were two men I had never seen pointing two different guns at me. They took me to my brother's room, which had my brother and his fiancée bound and gagged. My few months old nephews were asleep, but woke up, obviously stressing out his parents, asking for mercy for the baby. They made me remove the battery of my phone to give it to them. Then they made me pack my clothing, TV, Xbox, etc. to give that to them. They kept saying that now their kids will have something to play with. They took me downstairs pointing a gun to my head and then blowing into the barrel, and took me to my parents' room, which was also bound and gagged. They took cars, food, clothing, etc. We later found out they were police officers. We tried filling out a report but were denied because it was outside working hours. Once we did, we got a call from the police asking for ransom for the cars. We didn't pay for it, so we didn't get the cars back. This was in Venezuela, about 5 years ago. Things have gotten so much worse since. My wife used to work for Value Village, and for Halloween, they gave her this t-shirt with the big face of a mad scientist on the front. This mad scientist's face would glow in the dark. One night, I was in a dead sleep when I felt the bed move. It woke me up and the first thing I see is this glowing mad scientist face coming right toward me. Having just been woken from a deep sleep, terror suddenly gripped my mind and I screamed and literally jumped out of bed, flipping the light on. My wife is dying of laughter, and she is wearing that shirt. I was not happy and could not sleep for a while after. When I was a really little kid, about 4, I woke up to a faint glow coming from my window. I looked out and saw the house of my only neighbor at the time covered in fire. Unfortunately, I was too young to understand what fire was. I got up and toddler hobbled over to my mom's bedroom door and attempted to open it. It was locked, so being the strangely well-behaved kid I was, at the time, I quietly went back to bed. The neighbors were a really nice elderly couple, and they died in that fire. The perfect storm occurred. The husband couldn't walk without a wheelchair and the wife had a cane. The smoke alarms had died and not been fixed. They had been asleep when the fire started, and their caretaker was their granddaughter and she had gone out with friends for the night. By the time they woke up, the bedroom door was already blocked by flames. They both suffocated, and their bodies were charred by the flames. The house was barely a foundation by the end. When I was 10, I rediscovered this memory and I needed therapy. I blamed myself and I still do. My bedroom overlooks the patio in the backyard. At night it gets super dark because there are a lot of trees and dense foliage, and it's also very secluded as it isn't easy to get into the backyard because of the foliage along the sides of the house. I have a back door in the kitchen which, inexplicably, has a doorbell that was installed by some previous owner. It makes no sense to be there because no solicitor or package carrier would attempt or even think to go in their backyard. Anyway, it was a literally dark and stormy night, so I had a tough time falling asleep, but once the weather calmed down I did doze off. Sometime later, around 2 or 3 a.m., I was roused by the doorbell. I barely woke up, thinking I dreamt it, or if anything it was kids doing a ring and run, but then remembered, my front doorbell has a uniquely different sound than the back door, and this was not the front door. So, I drifted off assuming I dreamt it. But then, 10 minutes later, I heard it again, this time clear as, well, a bell. My mind started racing. Dare I peer through the curtains to look at the back door? What would I see? I was in full panic mode. Then, another minute or two later, and another single thing. I called the cops. They said they'd send a car around, and eventually, the front doorbell rang, and I got a phone call letting me know an officer was at the front door. I let him in, and he said he'd walk the perimeter. He didn't find anything, and even he said he can't see anyone getting back there to play a prank because it was such a pain navigating to the backyard. I never did find out who or what rang the back doorbell, but to this day I wonder, is it better that I don't know? When I was young, my parents visited London, a lot. One time we stayed long enough to warrant a flat rental with one of those tiny little balconies on the 5th floor of the building. I stayed on the fold-out couch in the living room next to the balcony, my parents stayed in the master bedroom. It was a nasty hot summer, so one night my dad decides to leave the window open, without telling my mom, when we go to sleep. That night, I woke up to the sound of my mother screaming, not in fear, mind you. No, this was the blood-curdling scream of a woman who was about to murder someone. I bolted upright to watch the shadow stream across the room and literally fly out the balcony window, with my mother flailing her arms about as she charged after him, screaming at the top of her lungs, all the way to the balcony where she continued to scream after him. I don't know how he escaped her. I just know I was more terrified of her at that moment than I was of the pathetically unprepared creature she was after. He must have been scared too. I've never seen a thief run that fast.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.